Hi everyone. Now, after our last European Alliance live stream, I got this email from Charlie here in the UK. Now, Charlie says that to effectively argue against a monarchy, you need a credible idea of what you would replace it with. I read that Republic supports an elected democratic head of state, but this raises some questions. Now, he's quite right about the need for clarity about the alternative. Although Republic won't be writing a new British constitution, it's useful to give an idea of what the alternative might look like. And Charlie raises a few excellent questions, so I thought I'd answer those questions by making a video just about this issue. Charlie's first question was simply, what would an elected head of state be called? Well, the usual practice is to use the term president. Some people think this conjures up images of a US-style presidency and people like Trump or Bush, but in my experience, once people engage with an issue, they're more than capable of understanding the difference, and I'm not sure that the title will sway opinions one way or the other. That said, if someone's got a good alternative title, let me know in the comments below. The next question was, what would be the role of this head of state and how might this be different between new European republics? There are a few different kinds of republic, most of which fall broadly into one of three categories: US style, Irish style and French style, with some variations on those themes. Now, the US style is well known. It's a president as the executive, the head of government, as well as the head of state, and elected by the voters. This model is rare in the democratic world, although it's been aped by some less than democratic nations in the hope of hiding their despotism behind a cloak of legitimacy. In France, Poland and Finland, for example, executive power is shared between the president and the prime minister, while in Switzerland the head of state role is held collectively by members of the Federal Council, which also functions as the government, while each year one of the council is elected by the Swiss Parliament to serve a one-year term as President of the Swiss Confederation, but this gives the person no additional powers. In Ireland they have a Westminster-style parliamentary democracy with a Prime Minister in the lower house, as we have in the UK, and a separate constitutional head of state, the President. The President of Ireland is directly elected by the voters, and for most of the time his role is ceremonial. However, he does hold some limited reserve powers, including responsibility for signing acts of parliament into law. If the president believes an act of parliament is unconstitutional, he can refer the law to the Supreme Court. If the court finds it is not unconstitutional, the president must sign it. If it is unconstitutional, the new law falls and doesn't come into force. So this is a very key way of protecting the constitution and the people from the excesses of any party political ambitions. So the next question is, would they have any political power, and if so, what would this be? Now, there's a big difference between constitutional power on the one hand and political power on the other. Political power means powers that can be exercised according to a person's political beliefs, and judgment, constitutional powers, can only be exercised in accordance with the requirements of the Constitution. So, for example, an MP can refuse to vote for a law because they disagree with it, while the kind of head of state that we're proposing can only refuse to sign a new law if they think that it is unconstitutional, meaning it conflicts with the Constitution as it currently stands. The Republic proposes a system similar to Ireland's, with a constitutional president with limited reserve powers, and this model is similar to Germany, Italy, Greece and so on. So Charlie's next question is, would only a directly elected head of state be acceptable, or would an arrangement like the appointment of the German president also be acceptable? How would a head of state be elected? Well, the Republic proposes direct election by the voters, as they do in Ireland, but a republic in which the head of state is appointed by a special assembly, as it is in Germany, would of course be legitimate and a good place to end up, and so much better than the monarchy. Now, personally, I think that a directly elected head of state is a better, more democratic option. It takes the party politics out of the equation by allowing a free and fair vote for every citizen. So Charlie then moves on to the issue of the Commonwealth and asks, what would these reforms mean for other countries around the world who have our monarchs as their head of state, and what benefits would an elected head of state receive in each country? Would they live in palaces, receive the same kinds of support and so on? Now, I'm all for humility in public office. A head of state is an important role and is symbolic of the nation in a limited way, but I'm not keen on presidents living in palaces. Turn the palaces into museums and provide a suitable official residence for the President in London. Perhaps Clarence House, currently occupied by Prince Charles, just round the corner from Buckingham Palace, would be an appropriate official residence for the British elected head of state. As for the rest of the Commonwealth, of course, that's entirely up to them to decide what they want to do. Most Commonwealth countries are republics already. Those that aren't will become republics, certainly if we do. I think that they wouldn't be left with much choice apart from those that have their own monarchs. We're going to see Barbados almost certainly become a republic in 2021, and we'll see what they do. But they've all got governors general who sort of de facto heads of state, who have official residences and so on. So I imagine it'd be a simple case of changing the plaque on the door from governor general to president or head of state or whatever title they want to give them. And then, of course, the biggest question of all from Charlie, which I've heard many times before: why do we need a head of state at all? Now, it's kind of a fair question, but there are important practical, political and constitutional reasons for having an effective, independent head of state. Now, it's worth saying that at the moment we only have a head of state in name. The Queen is not independent, can't play a serious constitutional role. She can only do what the Prime Minister tells her to do, as we saw with the prorogation of Parliament, something which was then ruled to be unconstitutional, but it was very clear that she would always do what she's told by the Prime Minister. We have no separation of those two roles, and that's a bit of a problem, because the head of state can play a very crucial role as an independent check and balance on the power of Parliament and government. As I mentioned before, if you've got a written constitution, or any kind of constitution really, and Parliament tries to do something which goes against that constitution, the President can step in and say, well, hang on a minute, that contradicts the constitution, I'm going to send it to court to decide whether it is unconstitutional or not before I'm going to be signing it into law. There is also, I think, an important symbolic aspect to it. I think it's useful to have a symbolic head of state who is separate from the government of the day, and I certainly look to Ireland for excellent examples of that. The current President of Ireland, Michael de Higgins, is a brilliant head of state in my view, as were his immediate predecessors, Mary MacLeese and Mary Robinson. There are also then serious practical and political issues. Now, it's worth thinking about 4 countries in Europe over the last decade, which are Italy, Greece, Spain and Belgium. Now, all 4 of these countries faced economic and or political crises over the last decade. All 4 of them faced periods of time when they were struggling to form a stable government because of the way that the fortunes of the big parties were falling and smaller parties were growing, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for them to form stable coalitions. In each of these countries, the head of state stepped in to play a role. In Belgium, the head of state had an active role in appointing a caretaker government which served for 18 months while the politicians in Parliament tried to work out a way of forming a stable and lasting government. In Spain, the head of state also had a role in the last couple of elections when there have been unclear results, where stable governments have been difficult to form, and there were decisions to be made in that circumstance by the head of state in terms of who to invite to attempt to form a government, or whether to facilitate negotiations, whether to give an advantage to one party over another or so on, or whether to grant another election. Now, as I'm sure you know, Italy and Greece are republics. They have presidents. As it happens, they are both elected by their parliament. Spain and Belgium have kings, and yet the kings were doing the same role as the presidents. Now, you might think, well, that's okay then, but of course, the presidents in Italy and Greece, they had decisions to make for which they could be held accountable. If they got it badly wrong, if they misused those powers, there could be consequences. They could be impeached. They could be removed at the next vote for head of state, denied a second term, whatever. In Spain and Belgium, you have a king doing this who is unaccountable, unrepresentative. No one voted for him to be there. There were no elections. When the Spanish king a few years ago resigned in disgrace, they said abdicated, but he resigned in disgrace. His son simply took the job. There was no discussion about having a vote, or there was no discussion in Parliament about who their head of state was going to be. And yet this man, without any hope of proper accountability or scrutiny, is playing a hugely important role in the constitutional and political future of Spain. Now, this is a problem because these are never purely ceremonial roles. There's no point in a purely ceremonial role. You know, it's a very expensive job for someone who does literally nothing but cutting ribbons and smiling at people. There is a constitutional position, and as soon as someone is empowered and required to start making decisions on behalf of the rest of us, they have to be accountable. So in a parliamentary democracy, there is a case for having a separate, effective, accountable head of state with limited constitutional powers and with a responsibility for keeping the ship of state afloat and upright when there is a political or economic crisis, which makes forming a stable government difficult. Now, it works well elsewhere. You know, Germany does it well, Italy does it well, and Ireland is particularly successful at this over the last few decades because it's the Irish people, not the politicians, that do the choosing. And I think that's really important. So a head of state is a good thing to have, but it has to be an effective, real head of state, not someone who's simply occupying the position but not taking any of the responsibility and not able to exercise any of those powers. So that's it for me for now. Don't forget to head over to republic.org.uk where you can find out more about Republic, about the issues of the campaign and how you can get involved. Bye for now.